Somebody stand up. Say the pledge. Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first thing we need to do is make sure you can hear.
No.
No.
Okay, we'll try again. Can you hear up front? Can you hear it back?
Not really.
Not really? Okay, I'll get closer. Is that better in the back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Roll back here.
That's next way down. Okay, so again, welcome this afternoon to our meeting. This is time for us to tell you about the school system finances and budgeting, and you to tell us your thoughts about the potential changes in tax and that sort of thing, because of increased property values. First, we'll have a presentation by Mr. Carter, the finance director, and then Mr. Nick's superintendent. Then it'll be your turn to ask your questions or make your comments. You'll each have 3 minutes. Hopefully you have all signed up. Sign-up sheet is somewhere around, there should be one available outside. Okay. We'll have someone call your name in the order that you signed up. And I would all very much appreciate that when a person is talking, that you let them finish their 3 minutes or however long they take. And so we can hear them and understand what they're saying to us. And then that will help us a whole lot. What is it today? I don't have a note here on the, but anyway, if you would, that would help us maintain order and decorum and, like I say, to understand what people are saying. Whatever the other thing was I had in mind, it'll come back before we actually get into it. So I think with that, I think we're ready to turn things over to Mr. Carter.
Good evening, Board. Good evening, Board. All right, so for tonight, I thought it would be a good idea to start out with some important terms and definitions for some of the concepts we're going to be talking about so that everybody is on the same page. The Quality Basic Education Formula is the state's primary way to fund public schools. It was created in 1985 and takes what we report regarding student count and the services being provided, and then calculates how much is sent. That data we collect for the QB formula are called FTEs, or full-time equivalents. They are a measurement used to calculate the student count and services that we're providing. Within the QBE formula, there's something called local fair share, which is money that the state withholds from what is supposed to come our way. It is equal to 5 mils of funding, and it's withheld from the gross amount of our QBE earnings. Equalization is a state funding grant given to districts based on their wealth per FTE, and in an effort to make funding more equalized across the state. And then we'll be talking about 2 personnel groups: certified personnel, which are instructional personnel, principals, assistant principals, those kind of personnel, and then classified personnel, which will be custodians, maintenance, bus drivers, clerical, and paraprofessionals. In order to brief everyone on the complex nature of how Georgia funds schools, Here's a quick video we're going to play from the Georgia Budget Policy Institute.
The decades-old law that dictates how the state of Georgia disperses money to schools sits at the heart of most education policy discussions in the state. This video will answer the question, how does Georgia fund schools? Georgia's public schools are funded through a law passed in 1985 called the Quality Basic Education Act, or QBE. At its most basic, QBE takes the total number of students and uses that number to decide how much to pay out for school employee salaries, known as direct instructional cost and indirect cost, and other expenses needed to run a school, known as categorical grants. Before sending that amount down to each district, QBE subtracts out what the state thinks each district should be paying on its own, called local fair share. We'll talk through each of those buckets here, but first it's key to understand how QBE counts students. Twice a year, every school in the state counts the number of students present and notes what classes the students are in. Think general ed, gifted, or special education. These programs are funded differently based on things like what the state believes the appropriate class size should be. To account for students in different programs, the state divides up the day, then combines the pieces based on the programs they're in. The result is titled full-time equivalent students, or FTEs. By counting FTEs, the state can find out how many teachers need to be paid. Teacher salaries make up the bulk of the first bucket in the QBE formula, direct instructional costs. Each year, Georgia's General Assembly comes up with a base dollar amount to fund for each student. In 2019, it was $2,620.77. Every program the state of Georgia pays for is given a weight. When QBE was created, it was decided that general education high school students were the least expensive to educate and assigned them a weight of 1. Middle school, by comparison, is weighted slightly higher. At its most basic, if you had 100 high schoolers and 100 middle schoolers, after multiplying by each of the weights in the base amount, the middle school would be given just under $300,000, while the high school would get $262,000. Once school systems replicate this process for each program, the final dollar amount is how much each should be given for direct instructional costs. The next bucket is indirect costs. These are things that affect the students but aren't the classroom teachers. Think libraries, school maintenance, and salaries for principals. The funds for these positions are tied to the number of schools within the system and the number of FTEs in those schools. Here's what this looks like in practice for Fayette County in the 2018-2019 school year. You can see the calculation for direct instructional cost and indirect cost. At the bottom of these two buckets is the QBE formula earnings. Although the state says that Fayette County Public Schools need $128 million for these costs, this is not the amount the district will receive. To understand why, it's important to look back over 30 years. Before QBE, it was local taxes, not state money, that paid the most for schools. When QBE was being created, there was a fear that some local districts would just stop paying for schools altogether and make the state pay for everything. So lawmakers built in the requirement that each school system taxes their district 5 mills, or $5 for every $1,000 of property value. This is known as local fair share, or required local effort, or 5 mil share. It's got a lot of names. So before the state sends down all the dollars needed to run a school system, it deducts the local fair share. After the calculation of direct and indirect educational costs and the subtraction of the local fair share, the state provides the fourth bucket, categorical grants. These grants are for services such as paying school nurses or sparsity, which would help smaller districts pay for overhead fixed costs like air conditioning. School bus transportation is also funded through categorical grants, although the state has paid a significantly lower percentage of the cost since 1991, when it paid over half. Equalization grants are also in this bucket. The state provides this money to districts that have less ability to raise money through property taxes. Even though every district has to tax 5 mills for education, there is nothing stopping them from taxing more. Equalization grants are given to districts with a lower tax base to ensure that all districts can provide a basic public education. There's much more to QBE, but that's the basics for how Georgia funds schools. The Quality Basic Education Act was ahead of its time, but that was a long time ago. By reference, you're watching an online video about a formula that was written when less than 10% of all houses in the US even had a computer. The same basic formula that dictated where over $9.6 billion went in 2019. To learn more about where those billions of dollars came from, as well as where they're going, head to gbpi.org.
And then we've got a very brief video on equalization specifically.
I want to tell you about two elementary schools in Georgia, located only 3 miles away from each other. School A receives over $10,000 for every student. School B, only $8,200. That means for every 20 students they teach, School A is given an additional $42,000. That's money that can buy computers, repair the roof of the school, or hire an additional teacher. How is this possible? The answer? School A and School B are in different counties. In Georgia, local property taxes make up over 40% of school budgets. If the housing prices are high in one county, it's relatively easy to pay for schools. If property values are low, however, the taxes that school receives will also be low. When Georgia lawmakers made the law deciding how schools should be given money, they knew property taxes made the playing field unfair. If the state gave every school the same amount of money, then those counties with high property values would be able to give their kids many more opportunities than the schools with low property values. So they created the equalization grant. The grants provide additional money to districts with low property values. Every year, the state ranks all schools based on how much money they raise in local taxes, then gives more state money to those districts that fall below a certain threshold. For the first 15 years, school districts below the 90th percentiles were given grants, meaning that the state gave additional money to 163 districts. In 2000, the formula was changed to the 75th percentile. This lowered the amount of money given to low-wealth districts considerably. In 2012, the state began calculating without considering the top and bottom 5% of districts, and the equalization threshold was lowered to the 50th percentile. The end result is that Georgia provides hundreds of millions of dollars less to the school districts that need it most, and how two schools 3 miles away from each other can have huge differences in the opportunities for their students. Equalization was put in place because the state has a constitutional obligation to provide an adequate public education to all students. Lawmakers must protect and bolster equalization as a way to treat all students, regardless of where they live, as equal.
All right, so how is CCBS funded specifically in the mechanics of those very complex state measurements? So locally, it's made up of property taxes, things like TAVT tax, which is for car registrations. There's some real estate taxes and intangible taxes that make up a very small portion. At the state level, it is largely made up of that quality basic education formula. We also receive some grants from the state level for CTAE or vocational programs. From the federal government, we get grants such as Title I and IDEA. Title I is to deal with poverty, and IDEA is to address needs of the special ed program. We also get eSWAS, which is 1 cent sales tax for approved referendum projects that has to be legally used for capital projects only. And how are we monitored? How do the powers that be make sure that we are utilizing our funding correctly? First of all expenditures are governed by our internal controls. We're monitored consistently by the Georgia Department of Education on every facet of what we do. All of our financials are audited yearly by the Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts. And our eSWAS funds and activity are audited specifically by an outside CPA firm every year as well. And ever since I've joined the system back in 2020, there's been no findings, no misstatements on any of these audit reports. So getting into state funding specifically for this coming year, this is another simplified picture to talk about how the complexities of QBE earnings feed into state funding. We've got the QBE formula plus equalization minus that local fair share. I believe we made copies of our FY25 allotment sheet from the state available outside, but this was also in the video. So So direct instructional costs on the upper left, indirect costs down kind of in the middle left. And then on the right side, you can see how many teachers we quote unquote earn from this QBE formula. So for example, in FY25, there was 482 kindergarten FTEs, which earned the school system 32.13 teachers. And so on and so forth. You can see that for all the direct instructional categories on the left side. Additionally, on that right side, you can see the other positions that are earned throughout the district, such as assistant principals, accountant, social worker, psychologist, those kind of things. Talking about the specific funding in that allotment sheet, here's a summary to kind of break it down. At the end of every year, so that FY24 midterm, it takes the FTE count we submit in March, which was 9,914, and it assumes that FTE count to start the new year. So the FTE counts are the same. Our gross QBE earnings went from a little over 85 million to almost 90 million. But then that local fair share we talked about is backed out of that. So last year it was a little under 12 million. This year it's a little over 13 million, or about a $1.2 million decrease. Equalization as well decreased slightly by about $202,000. One of the great things that the state did during this last legislative session was increase the amount of transportation funding that districts receive. So it went from about $1 million last year to a little over $2.3 million. And then nurses stayed about the same, about $235,000. So the total FY25 initial QBE funding comes to $83,384,407. Two things I wanted to point out with these figures is it was great, like I said, for the state to send more money for transportation. We got a little bit over $1.3 million in new funding there, but the losses we incurred for the local fair share and equalization wiped that out completely. So we weren't able to make up any ground really on that increase. Additionally, as I said, from the midterm allotment last year to the initial this year, the total funding went up about $4.7 million. But that's due to really three state mandated factors. The governor gave certified personnel $2,500 state mandated pay raise. The state funds that through this formula, so about $2 million of that increase is to pay for those raises that they mandated. Additionally, there's more state mandated health insurance increases this year, totaling about $2.29 million. That is also part of that $4.7 million number. And additionally, the system has paid about 19.98%, I believe, of a teacher's salary for TRS costs. And that percentage bumped up to over 20% for FY25. So that funding that the state provides for those individuals is also a part of that $7 million increase. Talking about some trends here with those mechanisms. The chart here shows the last 6 years in the tax digest. So in 2019, the tax digest was valued at about $1.68 billion. And this year, the Board of Assessors just passed the valuation that brought it up to $3.1 billion. During that same time, the local fair share, which is that money we do not get from the state, they withhold from us, went from 8.4 million to over 13 million. And then over that same period again, our equalization funding went from between 9 and 10 million, now below 4 million. It's about 3.9 million this year. So takeaways on state funding. As the tax digest increases, Catoosa County is deemed wealthier by the state. Therefore, CCPS receives less state funding due to these built-in mechanisms in the QBE formula. While CCPS is receiving 4.7 million more in QBE funding, it is almost entirely due to new state mandated costs. We have lost about 4.57 million over the last 4 years to local fair share, and almost 6 million in equalization over the last 4 years, for a total of about 10.5 million. All right, talking about local funding. So what does CCPS have control over? It's just the school millage rate. We do not have control over the assessed value of taxpayer property, the property tax process, that the powers that be set in place, and state and federal funding mechanisms, regulations, and mandated expenses that we'll cover later on. Breaking down the local funding change that occurred a few weeks ago. As I mentioned, that 2023 digest was about 2.3 billion, and the new digest jumped up to 3.1 billion for a little over $800 million increase. Of that 800 million, 723 million was due to reassessment. And then the new growth in the county totaled 155 million to 6346. In addition, there were $78 million new in school digest exemptions. So the net growth after that was about 76.5 million. And just for comparison, exemptions given from CCPS versus the county to taxpayers. CCPS gave $531 million in exemptions for FY25, and Catoosa County's about $260 million. This is the actual legal document that I received, the PT 32.1 for the tax digest. So on here, the first column you can see is last year's digest numbers. The second column is that reassessment value. The third is the new growth and new exemptions. And the fourth is the totaling of the new digest for 2024. One interesting thing, in the 2024 reassessment of existing property I mentioned was about 723 million. But according to the most recent sales ratio study by the state, the county's assessed values were roughly $750 million undervalued prior to the reassessment. So those were based on 2022 numbers. You can go to the Department of Audit's website and see that report. What was shocking to us was, at the time, the county's property was the second most undervalued county in all of Georgia. Talking about school millage rates, the current millage rate is 15.040. It is still the lowest it has been since 2001, and the board took the rollback every year since 2016 until last year when they maintained at 15.040. Obviously, for 2024 is still under consideration, but we have 15.040 right now from last year. Some comparisons in the northwest Georgia area as far as mill rates go. Between the 10 kind of in our locale. Catoosa rates, 7. Whitfield, Paulding, Bartow, Floyd, Gordon, and Murray are all higher than Catoosa's. Walker dropped below us last year for the first time in a while. And Dade and Polk are holding it at 14. When looking at tax assessor estimators, based on the $300,000 home, including these new assessments that we're talking about, assuming the millage rates as they currently are, and with the homestead exemption, Catoosa County's figure would be $2,641.78, far below Floyd, Gordon, Bartow, Whitfield, and Murray. As I said, Walker did below us last year, so that is the one that's slightly cheaper. A little known state funding issue that we run into is if we roll back much further, we could get financially punished by the state. So, OCGA 20-2-165, state law says we must maintain a millage rate or an equivalent millage of at least 14 mills to be considered a qualified local school system to receive equalization funding. The millage rate it references is what the board adopts, while the equivalent millage is calculated by the state based off of their measurements of local taxes levied. So, to put that into context, for FY24, which just ended, the board maintained that rate at 15.040, but the equivalent millage was only 11.33, meaning in the state's eyes, the funds that we were able to collect with our 15.040 adopted millage really only equaled 11.33 mills because of the undervalued assessments. To my knowledge, this state mechanism is unique to school districts, so county governments, city governments aren't having to navigate that. And as I mentioned before, our equalization this year is a little under $4 million. So the risk of dropping much lower and losing that $4 million would be difficult. Looking at the Tax Digest history, this chart shows in the second column that net Tax Digest I mentioned coming in at a little over $3.1 billion in 2024. As you can see, the millage rate decreased for 2021 and 22. The board maintained last year, and they're still considering their decision for this year. If it was maintained, it would go up from approximately 35 million to approximately 47 million. That does include the 2.5% collection fee that we pay to the county government for their services. So what would that new funding go towards? Those state mandated healthcare increases I spoke about, and we'll get into more detail on them here momentarily. The bottom line is our local cost has increased to approximately $10.5 million a year in state mandated health insurance costs. And that is not something where we can go out and shop with Blue Cross Blue Shield or Anthem. It has to go through the State Board of Health for us, and so it is our only option, unfortunately. It also will go towards essential instructional personnel, not covered by the QBE formula. It will go for maintenance, custodians, the majority of paraprofessionals, the majority of the transportation department. Like I said, the state did provide more funds for that, but it's only about 37% of our expected cost. It helps us keep nurses in every school, SROs in every school, and ultimately it balances the budget. For years, the board has adopted budgets in a deficit to minimize the impact on taxpayers while depleting reserves to provide the same level of service for students. As I mentioned, we've lost about $10.5 million in state funding over the last few years due to that local fair share and equalization, and our reserves are now at critical levels. So what have we done to, what cost challenges are we dealing with, and what have we done to cut costs? Tying into the previous slide, here is the last 6 years and the deficits that the board has adopted in budgets in order to minimize the taxpayer impact. And here is our fund balance reserves history. So in 21-22, it was hovering around 25 million. And then once those healthcare changes, the local fair share and equalization mechanism started to change, it has precipitously declined. We took the rollback in 21-22 and in 22-23, and then maintained last year, but we still had to eat into our reserves to keep up the same level of service. The red line on the graph is what the state recommends school districts maintain as a safe level of reserves based on the amount of expenses we have. It is around 15 to 18 million, somewhere in there. So we've fallen behind that line at this point. Talking about those state mandated health insurance costs, for certified staff, it went from $1,580 a month per person to $1,760 per month per employee, effective last month in January. For classified staff, which is the group that we receive very little state funding for, it jumped from $1,195 per month per employee to $1,580 per month.
What is the classified staff?
That was what I talked about before. It's custodians, maintenance workers, child nutrition, those are
So it jumped to $1,580 per month per employee. That goes into effect in January. So projected in FY25, an additional $3.6 million of expenses will be impacted. For the certified staff, the state does pay through the QB formula for about 80% of those folks, but our expenses go up regardless. Bottom line is state mandated insurance expenses are projected to balloon to $26.5 million a year, with $10.5 million paid out of local funds. For reference, these costs were as low as $945 per month per employee as early as 2 years ago. To kind of lend additional context to how the state funds the health insurance costs that they are mandating for our certified personnel. The information on the left here is the gross amount of funding that we received from the state over the last 4 years. And 4 years ago, it was a little over 80 million. It dipped down $1 million or $2 million the last couple. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, it went up to 83.3 million this year. But if you back out the amount of money that is in that gross figure, that is purely for health insurance, where the state pays it to us in 12 equal payments, and then we send it right back for those health insurance costs. 4 years ago, we were netting about 72 million. Went down to 69 or 70 million the next year. Dropped all the way to 65 million last year. And it's projected to be 67.3 million that we're left over with after removing the money for the healthcare costs. Some other state mandated expenses that kind of came out of the blue. House Bill 538, the Early Literacy Act. It requires that the Georgia State Board of Education approve universal reading screeners, and has those stipulations with it to make sure that we monitor and report back the progress. The problem with this ultimately on the financial side is that this is a requirement that zero state funding was provided to implement. The curriculum and materials alone will cost a little over $1 million over the next 2 years. And we've had to add 2 personnel positions to manage this rollout and manage the reporting back to the state on a monthly basis. Another state mandated cost that we are not in control of is the employer side of TRS contributions, or the teacher's retirement system. As I said earlier, it was 19.98% of a teacher's salaries last year, and it went up to 20.78%. In total, it's projected to be a little over $15 million in costs in FY25. Again, with the certified personnel that is earned through the QBE formula, the state pays for that, but the QBE formula does not cover all necessary instructional staff. So any of those folks we have to pay for locally. So what have we done to cut costs? We eliminated positions across the district and school levels. About 40 instructional positions, or 4% of that employee group. 25 parapro positions, or about 10% of that group. And 5 administrative positions here at the county office for about 7% of that group. For an estimated total savings of about $5.6 million. With those changes, class sizes will naturally increase, but we feel that further cuts would impact instruction. To give you an idea, your 40 teachers, that seems like a lot. Here is a graph kind of showing the breakouts of our employee groups. And then teacher parapro group is 69% of the total employee base. One hazard when cutting costs, especially when we're talking about paraprofessionals, which are typically hired to assist with our special ed students. If we cut too much, we could get financially punished by the federal government. And it's because of something called maintenance of effort. So what is maintenance of effort? It is a federal requirement that a school system must budget and spend at least the same amount of local or state and local funds as it did the previous year on educating students with disabilities. So what happens if we do not pass that maintenance of effort test? If we cut too quick or too much, causing us to fail that test, we could lose the IDEA 6B federal grant, which for us would equate to about $2.4 billion. So that would have a massive impact on teachers and paraprofessional staff or our special ed students. Additional things we've done to cut costs, targeting insurance premium decreases. So We're increasing deductibles, adjusting limits on every policy that we maintain. And some good news is we've already identified about $65,000 in savings through the early review. Another thing we did is we expanded our shared savings program to further address insurance rates continuing to rise. That saved us about additional $150,000 this last year. And a new government accounting standard gave us some flexibility on being able to use East Loss funds for instructional tools and subscriptions. So GASB 96 was a rule set forth by the Government Accounting Standards Board, classifying or opening the door to be able to classify what they call subscription-based IT assets as capital assets. So if it's something that can be a capital asset, then it's something that could be utilized by using East Loss funds. So it will help out there throughout the year as we can utilize those funds and not have to spend general funds on those. Unfortunately, nothing's changed on the personnel side. We still cannot use East Loss funds for personnel costs. All right, so let's talk about the projected expenses and budget overall. It is based on 9,941 students, 180 instructional days, a little under 150 teachers, 170 parapros, and about 21 total employees. It also includes a little under $1.2 million that we pass directly to the schools for instruction. On the revenue side, obviously this assumes the current millage rate. Property taxes would come to that $45,374,529 number I mentioned before. Projecting title ad valorem taxes at $3.9 million. Sales taxes, which are unrelated to a loss of any kind, would be $885,000. You're in lieu of taxes, $775,000. With interest rates remaining high for the time being, projecting us to be able to collect a good bit on an interest to help offset some costs. As I mentioned, our state funding with the vocational grants included comes to right under $85 million. And then this other local sources, $740,000. That is where the actual programs that we have at the elementary schools, they're their own separate little financial entity. And so since all payroll is processed through the county office, they send us money, which looks like revenue on our side, and then we have an expense going out for those payroll checks. On the expenditure side, broken down by functional category here, instruction, talking about regular programs first. It's projected to be a little under $59 million. It's almost $1.5 million increase from last year. Special ed, a little under $26.5 million, with about a $1.2 million increase. Specific programs, which are your gifted, remedial, those kind of programs. Total about $5.7 million, or 81,188 increase. And then CTAE programs or vocational programs, a little under $5.5 million, with an increase of $327,000. Pupil services, $5,985,448, with an increase of $681,000. Improvement of instructional services, a little under 2.5 million. A very small reduction, about $228. Media services, a little over 1.8 million, with just an $82,000 increase. General administration, a little under 1.4 million, which is a $6,700 decrease. School administration, $9,672,000, with $553,000 projected increase. Business services, which is right at $1 million, projected to go down about $32,000. Maintenance and operations, budgeted at a little under $10.5 million, with a $373,000 increase. Our transportation services, budgeted about $6.5 million, with a $316,000 increase. Central support services, a little over $1 million, with a small increase of $11,000. Other support services, which is in the enrollment department, total budgeted $472,873, with an increase of $110,000. The main increase there, I'll talk about the reasons for the increases across the board here on the next slide. But the main reason for the increase there is we shifted an employee from one department to another to address and focus on residency checks to make sure that the students going to Catoosa County schools are Catoosa County students. And then community services, that is tied into the ASP process as well. That's projected at $370,000. So it's $137,662,428 in expected expenditures. That's an increase of just under $5.2 million. So why did some of those numbers go up? So the state mandated $2,500 salary raises for all certified personnel. The state mandated healthcare costs for all certified and classified personnel. The state mandated TRS increase. And while the state does cover some of those costs for the certified personnel, it still increases our expenses on that side. Also included are salary step increases for experience and or education, like if somebody gets their doctorate. Pay scale raises for parapros, clerical, bookkeepers, and head custodians. 10 work days were added for administrators. Inflationary costs that we're all experiencing for us. Our high dollar items are diesel and utilities. And then the state mandated literacy and ESOL requirements I mentioned before. So the literacy, that was the one with $1 million price tag on the curriculum, and we had to hire 2 folks to manage the state's requirements. We have a similar set of requirements for ESOL that have come upon us that we have to fund additional personnel as well. Also, ESSER funding, which was the federal funding that was given out during COVID, can no longer cover and offset some of the expenses that it has been for years. So half of the cost of us to have SROs in every school is covered under ESSER funds. Many instructional positions, we offset the cost of diesel fuel we were seeing. So things like that. So in summary, the total overview, local revenue projected to be right under 53 million. State and federal revenue right under 85 million for that total of 136,983,790. Total expenses would be 137,662,428. So that would leave us in a slight deficit of $678,000. As I mentioned, our fund balances have dwindled, so I'm projecting our starting fund balance this year is gonna be a little over 5 million. So backing out that deficit of 678 would leave us about $4.6 million in reserves. Does the board have any questions?
I don't think so. I think we're good with that information. Thank you folks, that was a lot of information to be presented. Can't hear you. Okay, better? All right, again, what I've said is thank you for sitting and listening. There's a lot of information to be shared. As you can tell, school finance, school budgeting is a very involved and complex process. Next we'll have some comments by Mr. Nix, and then we'll open it up to comments and questions from you folks.
Mr. Chairman, it's 80 degrees in here. Care if I take my coat off? 9. My fan is on high.
Did you pay for that?
We are saving money. You're right. Whoever said that. You turn the air on just a little bit. So I'm not an accountant. I am a former police officer, as you know, and school teacher. Austin can understand things that I cannot. He says things that are complicated, I don't understand it. And if there's anybody that can make something that's so complex that very few people in the state of Georgia can understand it, it is a bunch of lawyers in Atlanta, and they've made it very hard, and they've had years and years and years to do it. So I don't understand it all, but I'm going to take the big picture and try to get some big things and answer some questions that I think our folks might want to hear to provide a little bit of context. Now, we're all here for the same reason, which is to improve our schools. We all have different ideas about what might do that. But that's the ultimate goal, and I appreciate everyone's respectful behavior and listening, and it means a lot, and I'll promise I'll be quick. I love these quotes right here. I'll talk about this first one at the end. Great schools, you probably have a pretty big community. I know some schools that are not that great, and you can buy some cheap property there. I'm proud of our schools and what we've done, and I'll talk about that. And then I love this verse. Be kind to each other. It's a tough world, and kindness goes a long way. I want to start out by saying, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Abraham Lincoln said that right after the Civil War, and I thoroughly agree with him on this. Facebook is not where to go to get information. We have information, I'll give it to you. We get I've been on the records requested, all kinds of things. It's public record, you can have it. Just ask me for it, we'll get it to you as long as it's legal. The big picture. Why do we need some additional funds? Why? Doesn't the state pay the salaries? Doesn't the state pay the salaries of 90% of your budget? Is salaries, benefits, the state pays it. So why are you troubled? Is this happening in other school systems? Is this just a Catoosa County thing? Is this just happening here? Because if it is, we've got a problem. Is it a funding problem or a spending problem? Are we getting money and not managing it very well?
Yes.
I hear that. We're going to answer that in a minute. Some would believe that, some don't. What has TCPS done to prepare for this? You've seen this come for years, you did nothing about it. All sure rates would be over 8 years ago, and then we would be in better shape. What have we done to get ready for this? And then, is our community receiving a good ROI, return on investment? Education is not just a cost, it's an investment. Are we getting a good return? So why do we need additional funds? Why? Well, I'll tell you, it's real simple. It's just like anybody's house. The costs to run a school system are going up, and state funding is decreasing. And these are the areas. State mandated health insurance increases, $3.6 million. We were told we're going to phase this in slowly, give you guys time to adjust. But this year the Senate said no, do it now, 2 years ahead of schedule. It's costing local taxpayers $3.6 million. State mandated TRS increase, $225,000. Inflation's costing, it's everything's more expensive. So schools are the same as everybody else. If we go buy something, it costs more. State salary increases That's $400,000 from our local funds. Local fair share. I also talked about this, the state's giving $4.5 million of our money this year, $13 million. $13 million, and it's costing this year $4.5 million. That's almost 2 mil right there. That's 2 of our meal points right there. The top of our bills, $2.5 million a meal. So you can kind of see where we're getting into some trouble. This is this year, and you can't plan for it. It just happens. Equalization grants. We don't know what we're going to get. They just, hey, here's what you get. $5.5 million less. That's a lot of money. All charity cuts. The state funds schools sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. And when they don't, they just say, we're sorry, but you're not getting the money that we told you you would get this year. Those people still come to work for a check. We have to find a way to pay them. And they've only fully funded their part for 18 of the last 20 years. And you can see where we've been. We're trying. We've been keeping a low bill rate. And then federal funds dried up. They just went away. They ran out. They were propping a lot of schools up. And now they're gone. We have a unique relationship with property values that other agencies don't. And the reason for that is because that's the only way that we can pay our people. We don't have laws. We don't have anything like that. It's the state constitution set it up for property taxes to be the way that school systems pay their employees. The Georgia Constitution talks about this partnership. And it's about, like this, some people say 60-40, but the federal government pays some. But it is a partnership between the school system and the state. However, it's very important to notice that even though it's a 60-40 close, use a big term, 60-40 split, the state's a controlling party. They make the rules. They're the ones that say you're going to tax your folks 14 mils, and you're not going to go below that. Because if you do, then we're going to take your equalization money away. But you can't go over 20. Because if you go over 20, you can't do that. So you got to be somewhere between 14 and 20 on the mill rate. That's just the way the state set it up, and we have to do it. The state is a controlling party, talking about a partnership. A partnership that funds every single public school in the state of Georgia, 159 counties and cities. That's a partnership. The state pays about 60%, and the locals pay about 40%, and you can take a little bit in there for federal government, they get some. So when they say they fully fund education, are they? No. Fully funding QBE does not mean they pay for all the teachers we have. It just means they fully funded their part. So, for example, they say, we're going to fully fund you and the assistant principal at your middle school. That's awesome. We need more than one. I don't know any middle school that has that many kids, only has one. But what do you fund that? Well, we're going to fund them at $52,000. So, there is no middle school that pays $52,000. It just doesn't happen. So if you want more, you got to pay for it out of local funds, and you have to use your local funds to finish paying for that assistant superintendent. We have school nurses in every one of our schools. Our parents love them. They want them there. But they cost $1 million. The state gets $250,000. So you see this chart, you see what is funded on certified. Certified are teachers and administrators. The state pays about 840 of those. It pays 60% of 840. And then we pay some extra ones. New principals, we need an extra assistant principal. We pay that. Classified, anybody that's not a teacher, state funding, they pay about 65 folks to answer the phones. They give us a little bit of money for bus drivers, some custodian money, I think, about a lot. But we fund the rest of those folks. One partner in this partnership is paying less. And this is the state, and you can see, this is a problem. This is a big problem for public schools. One of the partners is paying less, they're not paying their fair share. And when they do this, they just tell you, you're not getting the money this year. That's just the way it works. They just don't give it to you. And that's happened 18 out of the last 20 years. One partner's paying more. So one's paying less, who's paying more? Well, we are. Because when the state pays less, somebody has to pick it up. So when they keep $13 million, we got to figure out a way to make that up. Because you're not getting $13 million this year. You're going to keep it funded. The $5 million you receive less this year. It's just the way the partnership works. They're a controlling party. One partner is having record surpluses. One party in this relationship is making bank. And it's the same. And they have so many $1 billion in Atlanta that a few years ago they changed it and said, we don't just want to keep 10%, let's keep 15%. And you can see the blue, that's all undesignated funds. That means that money, they don't have anything to do with it. It's just surplus money that sits down there. We need some of that money back to our schools so we can help our local taxpayers. One partner is taking a lot of money, one partner is not. Why are we doing this? Well, it's because of what Austin showed. They are taking the costs and putting some of it on us. And you can't just say, well, we did it this year. We funded you this year. We didn't get in this mess in 1 year. We're trying to dig out. It's been happening, as you saw, for many, many years. So that's caused us some challenges with our finances from a local level. Another part is keeping more and more local funds. So the $13 million that they keep from Catoosa County and do not send to us, 15 mills, they're keeping 5 mills worth, they're sending us 10 or so. Look, they're not even giving it all out. It was set up and said, we're going to, like Robin Hood, we're going to take from the 159 counties, we're going to take from the wealthier property values, and we're going to give it to the lower property values. But they're not even doing that. They're taking it and just keeping some of it, and then they give a little bit out. And they got all this money in the county. We need to use that. It would help our voters. It's just a Catoosa County problem. No, it's not. It's in every single system. I watch superintendents, they call me, they say, where are you? How are you doing this? What is your our finances are just like yours, guys. It's a tough, tough time. And I don't know any school system so far that is going to take a full rollback. Obviously, if we did, it would be 11. So here you see all these systems, it's all over the place. If we maintain a 1504, it will be the same mill rate that we've had for 3 consecutive years. The Board of Education did not increase property values. We did. You did. And if it stays the same, you can see it's 1504. Look at those around us. This board has been very, very, very fair. Some would say too fair with low mill rates. And there they are. That's it. So if we're spending too much money, this is how you know. That's your checkbook. That's what you look at. You say, are you getting too much money? You're not getting, well, I don't know. I don't think so, because look where we are. That's what we are collecting locally. That's how we pay our 40% of the partnership. The state gets it through all these sales tax and other means. The only way we can collect that 40%, for the most part, by and large, is property taxes. We didn't set it up that way. It's just the way it is. So are we paying our folks too much? The Georgia Salary Study comparison compares systems. And all systems are different. They've got different amount of kids, and some have buses, and some don't, and some go 4-day weeks. So this salary study that is conducted breaks all the systems down by small, medium, and large, and it tries to give you an apples to apples comparison. And the OpenGov website that's on the internet, you can go there and we do sometimes, but it's always about 2 years old because it takes a couple of years. So here's what it looks like. This is what we get. And I'm looking at our teachers and saying, man, we're paying our teachers too much. Our teachers paying, we're getting too much money, so I look on median salaries. And that's not in order. It's not fair. So if you look at 42,000, that's us. That means we pay our teachers lower than anybody around us. What about our principals? I know they make some money, it's adding in. Well, our principals are, right here it is. We're 24 out of 30. That's where we are. And you have to do it this way because you can't compare this school with some other school districts because it costs a lot of money to run the buses. It costs money to have other programs. And so this does it in a fair way. So are we paying our teachers and principals too much? No. Are we paying what about your other people? This study breaks down maintenance men, custodians, all the folks. No, we're not. And we're competing not just with McDonald's. Other school systems are trying to get our people. So they're saying, we will give you more money to come here and work in our district. And so when that begins to happen, you begin to lose good employees, and then your kids and your school district suffer. So I'm very proud that I recommended to this board that some of our folks get a raise. They deserve it. Our teachers deserve a raise. They deserve it. The state gave $2,500 raises out, so remember this partnership? When the state pays a little bit, you got to pay the other piece. That's just how it works. It's a match. It's a partnership. They pay some, we pay some. Our paraprofessionals, 8%. They got an increase. 5% for clerical staff. They deserve it. Some of our folks that actually thought our school was like $10 an hour. You can't keep it from. So we were having to beg people to come work. And custodians, we gave them some money. 10 additional days of calendars. Our principals are working all the time. Social media has made it 24-hour administrators. They get calls day and night. This kid says he's going to hurt somebody. This kid's going to come to school lunch. This kid says he's going to kill himself. They're working all the time. Full-time custodians, we gave them some money. They deserve it. Our part-time custodians deserve some money, and our bus drivers. And so I was proud to do it. So what did we do now to cut the cost? Well, here's what we did. And I think this is so important. We cut 70 positions. And you can see the number of employees where it dropped down. And these are not just teachers. 7% were from up here. Now, 5 people is a lot because we don't, that's 7% because we don't have a whole lot of folks up here. But we also cut teachers and paramedics. Is Catoosa a good return on this investment? Are folks getting their money's worth, so to speak? I think they are. I absolutely know they are. 100% I know they are. Well, how do you know? Because we outperform everybody else. So here's what I'm going to say, Mr. Chairman. If Catoosa County does not have a good school system, then nobody in the state of Georgia has a good school system because we need them. Look at the top. The state average is 41.7%. That's all the schools in the state of Georgia. We need them. Well, how about the folks just around you, though? Well, there, it's 40%, right there. This is English, this is ELA, and look, there we are, 43. We need both. So if Catoosa County is not a good return on the investment, with the lowest mill rates we have, and our teachers and our administrators making what they have, then nobody in the state of Georgia is doing a very good job with education, period. How about science? Again, state, 39%. Recent, 36.9. Where did Catoosa County come in? Well, there we go. And it's very difficult for us to, are y'all hot? I'm so sorry, guys. I promise. I'll speed up. Okay, so you see what we did. We did well, 37, 36. Catoosa did it again. Why do I have to pay schools? I'm just going to answer a couple questions because this may get asked, and I get this one a lot. If I don't have kids in the school, why should I pay? If I've already paid mine, well, it's the same thing that the kid's going to say when they say, well, I don't get Social Security, but I've been paying it for 35 years. That's the way the structure's set up. I don't drive on free lunch, but they got to pay it. The land purchase of RNS, yes, it was a lot of money. I will flat out say it. I said it last year. It was a lot of money. 100%. However, RNS is landlocked. We would never get that land again. So it was worth more to us than it was to some other people. And it's increased a lot. I looked at the value the other day. So You know, it's actually been an investment that's turned around and making money, in one sense. No, it doesn't. All you have is a bunch of administrators. No, we don't. 1,137 of our folks work with kids. The rest of us administrators work with adults. Do we offer exemptions? Yes, we do. A lot. Did we give some transportation money? Yes. But it still costs a pile. Would a 4-day week help? Yes, if we only pay people for working for 4 days. But they want insurance for 5. So, no, it's not a thing that helps financially. It does help a lot of smaller school systems are doing it to recruit folks. Because a lot of folks are really working 4 days, 5. Does the lottery run schools? No. It does for pre-K. Future consideration. So here's where we are. And I think this is the question. What type of school system do we want? That's the question that we have to ask. Because I've cut all the teachers I can cut at 40. We cannot cut any more teachers. And when we do more, we're already going to be in a little bit of a pickle. Already. And I don't know of any school system that cuts teachers and blows up class sizes that does better academically. So what happens is, as school systems begin to do this, like we are starting to do, the academic achievement suffers. So what do we cut next? If you say, well, we got to cut more, you just cut something. Okay, well, we're going to have to cut some of these folks, probably. Nurses, not because they're not important, but because they're unfunded. Remember, it costs us $1 million, we only get a couple $100,000. Social workers, custodians, therapists, clerical folks that answer the phone in the schools, our parapros, as much as it's allowed, these folks are going to be, those are the places we got to cut. Programs, which one? Our advanced classes, Gateway. Gateway costs a lot of money. But if we cut it, those kids will be on the street. Arts, band, foreign languages, athletics, furlough days. We just went through a while back, we just started back. That's what people just say, everybody in school system, you just don't work today, you don't get paid for it. Reduction in force, that's when we just say, hey, you know what, you don't have a job next year. And then further decreases. Your school system is a canary in the coal mine. When school systems start to fall and deteriorate, so does the land around it. I can show you a lot of very cheap property right now, but nobody wants to buy it, nobody wants to live there. And the school systems crumble is one of the things that shows that that's about to happen. Some people want to make public schools like public housing and public transportation. We can never let that happen because it will destroy our community. Those places have low property values, high crime rates, small churches, and few good jobs. Finally, the Board of Education has a different job than every other board because the state constitution says that we do. And why is that? It's because of the people that we listen to, our constituency. You have to listen to 10,000 other voices that are not in this room. 10,000 voices that are not in this room. That is the 10,000 voices of the kids in Catoosa County who are saying, make sure that you fund an adequate public education for me. So even though their voice may not be the loudest voice in the room, or the angriest voice, it is no less important. So what can we do? How about this? How about we work with local officials in Atlanta and say, hey, give us our $13 million back and let's put a poverty wage in, like every other state does and say, hey, that would really help us. $13 million right now would make a big difference. How about stop attacking our teachers? This would really help. Our teachers have hard jobs. It's a tough job. And there's a reason there's a shortage. I love our teachers. They work very hard. And they don't get the appreciation a lot of times they deserve. Our principals do as well. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for allowing me to share. And if you have any questions, I'll be available.
So we'll move to the portion of the meeting.